Welcome to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Come with us as we connect the pro-life movement's past to present, uncover hidden or forgotten history, and its connections to the battle still raging today. Now, here's our host, Danielle Underwood.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Danielle Underwood, and I'm here to bring you more insights about the past, present, and future of the pro-life movement. Today, we're talking with Anne McElhaney, a New York Times best-selling author, screenwriter, documentary producer, and director. Working alongside her husband, Anne produced and co-wrote the movie Gosnell, The Trial of America's Biggest Serial Killer, which first debuted in 2018. And she continues her creative endeavors today. So welcome, Anne.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much, Danielle.
Thank you for joining us. And you've been traveling. You've been jet setting across the Atlantic and spending some time in your native country.
Yes. I just came from Ireland yesterday. So, and I don't know if a lot of your listeners would know, but, we're not a very proud recent history in Ireland. The first country on the planet Earth that voted for abortion, first country on the planet Earth, that we have that distinction. And, in recent developments, we've discovered now, and of course, when they brought the abortion into Ireland, they said it would be very rare, very little. So 10,000 a year in a very small country. It's shocking and very upsetting.
And such a similar story we've had playing out here in the state of Kansas, where so many of the same claims were made. And yet we see we've had a tripling of the number of abortions here in our state since 2019. So really some sad parallels that have happened.
Yes.
But I'm particularly interested, and I know probably some of our listeners and our viewers have seen your movie, Gosnell, and maybe are familiar with some of your other work as well. And first of all, I just want to say, looking at all the projects, all the creative projects you've been involved with, you're a person with quite a lot of energy that you pour into these creative projects. And they also seem to come from a very deep place of passion for you. And I just wondered if you would want to tell us kind of what motivates you as you are choosing these different creative projects to be involved with. What is that common thread that ties them together?
Unreported stories, As a journalist, it's offensive when something massive happens that doesn't get the media attention that it should. The most recent project we've done, by the way, was about the October 7th massacre in Israel, which, was sort of memory hold by much of the media. And so we actually went to Israel in November and interviewed people who had survived the massacre and created a play, which has just had a 7-week run off Broadway in New York. But in the Gosnell case, this is an extraordinary story from a journalistic point of view. Forget about pro-lifers for a minute. From a purely journalistic point of view, this was an incredibly significant story. Not least among the reasons why was the absolute failure of the state of Pennsylvania to discover this guy who was operating and murdering in plain sight, actually in plain sight. He wasn't, they didn't inspect the clinic for 17 years. I'm just saying from a journalistic point of view, this was an extraordinary story. Here was by the way, an African-American man of an advanced age, was running this clinic, was making a fortune, his home was a complete mess. He had people working for him who were completely unqualified. People with drug addiction problems, with sexual abuse problems, people with very, 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 very colored histories of, all kinds of awful things having happened to them. Being the kind of people who no one would employ, but he employed them because he could control them. And he ran this, extraordinary clinic where terrible things happened, where minorities particularly suffered. And this was not suddenly interesting to the Washington Post. This wasn't interesting to CNN or the New York Times. And in fact, we wrote a book about it, and there's a whole chapter about how neglected the story was, and how, in fact, in the end, we shamed them. We, among others, by the way, including people like Molly Hemingway, shamed newspapers, shamed the mainstream media into reporting on the story. And the reason they didn't report on the story, which will sound very familiar to your listeners, was because they don't want anything that would shed a negative light on abortion, and they won't do anything, even their jobs. They won't do their job because it might negatively impact abortion.
It does sound so familiar. I mean, we've had similar stories play out here in the state of Kansas that so few people ever heard about because of that very same dynamic that we've seen play out, where it just doesn't get the coverage that it deserves. So before we talk about that, I was wondering, are there any other? I want to talk about the situation here in Kansas, but are there any other details about Kermit Gosnell's facility that you thought were important to include in the movie that you didn't just describe?
So I think the main reason we ended up doing this story was because of what happened in the court case. So this was almost a unique opportunity, I think, for pro-lifers. So just to make it clear, I was not a pro-lifer before Gosnell. I wasn't interested in abortion. I didn't know much about it. I would have been what they call neutral on abortion, which, by the way, there's no such thing as neutrality on abortion. You're either for abortion or you're against abortion. So I didn't really know much about it. But the court case was very interesting. And as I said, it's a very interesting opportunity for pro-lifers, because here you had, for the first time possibly ever, people who really strenuously believed in abortion, who were practitioners, who make their living doing abortions, being asked under oath on the stand to describe a good abortion, to describe what it's like when you do it right, when it's done properly. And they needed to do that because they needed the jury to be able to make a distinction between abortion, which is legal, and murder, which is illegal. And the jury were flabbergasted by the description of the legal abortion. They were absolutely floored by it. And I think there's some, so that particular witness who described a second trimester abortion, when we heard that testimony, we were like, okay, I want to make a movie. I want to make a movie and have that testimony in it. And we do have that testimony in the movie because we thought it was so valuable, because it's the thing that's never talked about. I mean, this is kind of a point, and I'm writing something about this at the moment myself. The one thing that's never talked about in the abortion argument, is abortion. That's the one thing they leave out. Like in Ireland, there was a huge debate about whether or not to introduce abortion into Ireland. The one thing that was never discussed was what abortion was, what it is, how it's done, the details. And I actually wrote about this recently, and I remembered I had met a woman at a party in Ireland after the referendum. And, she was typical of a type of person in Ireland who was, delighted. Oh my God, so delighted. Oh, isn't it great? Isn't it great? We've just got rid of this Eighth Amendment, and now we're going to have abortion in Ireland. And I said, I was trying to not fight with everybody I met. And I just said, what's really interesting to me is it's a pity there wasn't a description of abortion when the people were debating it. And she said, and I'm telling you, this woman, I'm sure, had a PhD, it was a very sophisticated party. And she said, why would we want that? And I'm thinking, yeah, I actually think it's kind of relevant, actually, because it might have an effect on you. It might have an effect on you if you actually knew what to do. And one of the things I want to do going forward is to highlight things that people just don't know. And I wrote a Substack recently about this, where I was looking back at photographs from Gosnell's clinic, and I spotted a photograph, and I thought, and it reminded me of when I was looking at the crime scene photographs when I originally got them. And there was a photograph, and it's, his place was really dirty and very badly kept. But there were two sieves, sieves that you would have in the kitchen, like for sifting flour, for making bread or whatever. There were two of them hanging on the wall beside these long tubes. And I remember thinking, what's that for? And I phoned someone that I had met through the work we were doing on the Gosnell movie. I met a woman who had worked at Hearn's late-term abortion clinic in Boulder, Colorado, Walter Hearn's late-term abortion clinic. And this wonderful woman that I met who deeply regrets the work she did there. But I said to her, what are they? What are those sieves? And she said, oh, you see, you have to empty, when you do the vacuum abortion, you have to empty what you get through a sieve so that you can work out if you got all the bits of the baby. And she said, usually a functionary, usually quite a low-level person, goes through to find the little hand and the little two hands and the little legs, and oh, we don't have a torso here, we don't have a head here, there's something missing. Make sure that the woman doesn't get an infection. And it's those details that I think are incredibly important. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I feel like I might have gone off on a tangent there.
No, but it's a really good tangent. And I think the other thing that I would add to that as well that very rarely gets talked about are the dangers for the woman, the harms that happen to them. And your movie does a very good job of explaining and personalizing, helping people to connect with the real woman who her case was really, that was the center of the case against Kermit Gosnell. I mean, her death and the way that they had completely mismanaged any kind of quote unquote care they were giving her. You know, that it was frightening to think about a woman walking into those conditions and what she was subjected to, and just really horrifying. I mean, it's really third world conditions.
And it's actually worse than you're describing. And I'll tell you why. Because the woman was from Nepal. She was a Nepalese refugee who had spent, 20 years in a refugee camp and came to America and was in America for 4 months. She didn't speak English. So she goes into this place, which you are correct, looked like something third world. And she thought she was in America. And she's in this like third world situation, being medicated to death by these women who, as the detective who was involved in the investigation, Jim Wood, who I adore, Detective Jim Wood, who said, you wouldn't let them mow your lawn, let alone give somebody medication. So this woman, Carnamaya Mongar, would have seen that. I mean, you don't need to be, you can look at people and think, my God, you don't look like you should be giving me anything. And she got scared and she panicked and she couldn't express herself because she didn't speak English. And she was scared and they phoned Gosnell, and because Gosnell wasn't even there at the beginning of this and they're medicating her. And she got scared and tried to kind of get away. And he said, the words are, everyone said those words in evidence in the court, med her up. And they knew what that meant, which was that they basically knocked her out. And they filled her up with medicine. And, that was the beginning of the end of Carnamaya Mongar's life. And I often think of, and I remember I was working on a story a long time before it struck me, oh my God, she didn't speak English. Can you imagine? You're not speaking English. There's these people and you're like, oh my God, I think I'm going to die here. Oh God, I think I'm going to die. And no one understands me. And I don't know how to express it. And I'm lying on this thing and they've given me something. And now I'm feeling kind of hazy. Like it's really frightening, really terrible. 4 months she was in America, 4 months. And that's how she ended up. And he wasn't even there when they started,
Heartbreaking. So interesting that you would bring that up because just on July 5th, our Kansas State Supreme Court just issued a final ruling completely striking down the clinic sanitation safety standards inspection law, which included licensure. And so, there are no abortion clinic specific regulations in place on their facilities at this point. And just in the backdrop of that, there was also a recent revelation just back in May. It kind of trickled out through some unusual places. It was actually through a pro-abortion journalism outlet, I'll call it that, I guess, that one of the clinics, one of the highest volume abortion facilities in Kansas, had been operating without medical oversight for at least a month. So, we think that this is some kind of rarity, but you have to wonder, if no one is watching, what is keeping this situation from playing out again and again and again? And, I just see so many parallels because, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we had this situation, it was the Krishna Rajana Clinic in Kansas City, Kansas. And that was back in 2003, this story emerged that there was a very similar clinic operating in Kansas City, Kansas. Filthy conditions, third world conditions, same type of thing with, safety exits blocked and instruments being kept in an open container above a toilet and, things that absolutely no American would ever imagine would be happening in the United States that were in fact happening. And, we find ourselves in this place where we really don't know that there are any mechanisms in place that will keep that from happening again. So it's crazy.
I'm trying to work out, by the way. I mean, I have a few questions for you.
Yeah.
Like, how did they justify how did they justify getting rid of the sanitation law? How did they justify that to themselves?
They justified it on the so our Kansas Supreme Court essentially, they call it, found this really inalienable right to bodily autonomy. That they found this in our Constitution, and decided that that meant that really, and when you play it out and you look at the consequences that come from that, that essentially all of our laws pertaining to the regulation of abortion in the state are presumed unconstitutional at this point. And then in 2022, the voters of the state were terribly misled to believe that if they rejected the amendment that was on our ballots, that the status quo would somehow be upheld, and that there would continue to be what they called heavily regulated abortion in the state of Kansas. And so, very similar to the situation that played out in Ireland. I think the voters were misled, and now we're seeing the repercussions. And again, back to, the tripling of the number of abortions in our state. So we've become this destination state for abortion in the Midwest.
The point you made earlier, though, by the way, about regulations and all of that. I mean, I have made this point many times because of the work we did on the Gosnell case, and that was that, there isn't. From what I've learned from the Gosnell situation, so Pennsylvania, very progressive, like super, super progressive, but and not a backwater of any kind, not a third world country. And if Gosnell was able to get away with it in Pennsylvania, it makes no sense to me at all. Like, it's illogical that there are not other Gosnells. It's illogical. Mm-hmm. It doesn't actually. There's no logic that would say, oh, it can only happen in Pennsylvania. Why would you say that? And the reason, like, the conditions are perfect in Pennsylvania. They're perfect, though, in New York, and they're perfect in Illinois. They're perfect in New Jersey and California, particularly perfect there where the government, if you like, this government with a small g, the local state government, is so pro-abortion. Like, the last thing any of these places want to do is to put any kind of barriers, as they consider it, in front of women. And in the very same way that journalists weren't willing to cover the story, and it's like, it sounds to me like it's what's happening in Kansas. We're not going to do anything, we're not going to do anything that might stop a woman getting access to abortion through all 9 months. We wouldn't want to do that, at all costs. So yeah, there's a bit of, it's a bit dirty, or there wasn't really whatever, but let's leave it. Let's just leave it anyway. Let's just keep going anyway. And something similar, by the way, has very recently happened in Pennsylvania, where I know that inspections that have happened, which were based, by the way, on what happened and what was discovered with the Gosnell case. And I don't want to get it wrong, but it was literally like something like 30% of abortion clinics in Pennsylvania. I think it was a really high number that were inspected, were found to be wanting, like seriously wanting, where, the most basic regulations, the most basic, standards had been set aside. And they're being set aside over and over again. And I'm sure it's happening in Kansas for the very same reason that people are, because abortion is it's very interesting. And I'm reading an awful lot about this, and I think it's really fascinating. The people who are in the industry of abortion are so protective of it and feel in some ways that, it's kind of almost a religious calling. And I know I'm using that word obviously very loosely, but they're so devoted to this that they won't do anything to prevent it continuing on, even if there's really awful stuff going on. And it's very interesting how much of that is out there. There's a lot of that out there, and it's endangering women. It really is.
It takes us right back to that risk factor for any woman who would step foot inside an abortion facility. Yeah, I agree 100% with everything you just said, and I think you already. So the factors that we think leave women and preborn babies vulnerable to this industry, and vulnerable to these unscrupulous people who have apparently, looking at the story of Gosnell, it appears that he essentially had no morals, or at least in the movie, it made it very clear that he was prioritizing the health of the turtles that he kept in his facility more than any human life. Yes. I wonder, are there any other, so beyond the hesitancy to inspect and oversee and regulate the abortion industry. And then the media's hesitancy to cover anything that has any kind of negative implication or sheds any kind of negative light. Are there any other factors that we need to be thinking of that are making women more and more at risk as this, just this push toward unlimited abortion continues in our state and in your home country of Ireland and, other places?
Well, there's now a very big push, of course, for this, do-it-yourself situation, right? And this at-home, taking this pill. And I literally have heard from someone recently. I don't want to get too detailed about this because it's somebody I don't want to identify this person in any way at all. But I heard from a doctor, a psychiatrist recently, who said that someone had come into a clinic where they had been given that pill basically, and this was somebody who had a history of mental health issues and quite serious mental health issues, but had had a complete break because had a recent abortion where they had been given medication to go home with and had not been spoken to about what to expect, and saw a hand. And I was gobsmacked. I heard that story kind of in a casual, I wasn't interviewing this person or whatever. It's somebody I know. And I just thought, how often does that happen that we don't know about? How often does that happen? I think there's a lot of stories that we don't get to hear about. Because, as I said, the industry, unlike, let's say, for example, maybe, I don't know, but, I think in medicine, there's probably quite a bit of protection, there's a bit of protection going on, you don't speak up or whatever. But I do think, you'd find, a group of oncologists, for example, when they would get together, would say, we always got to be careful about this, or we did miss this or whatever. I think there'd be a lot more transparency, and I think there'd be a lot more reporting and research on what's going on in the oncology world. And in this particular world, in this abortion world, I think there's a reluctance. And in fact, I came across some academic papers recently where they actually have a word for it, and they call it danger talk. And danger talk is talking negatively about the abortion industry. And they are aware of it. They themselves are aware of it. And so they have this whole thing where they have this danger talk. And so there's certain things that they're very comfortable to talk about. And that's the stuff you hear about. So they're very comfortable to talk about incest and rape, right? They love that because it's a harder one. I can understand it, but I can argue that one with them at the very, because I don't think no violence can be solved by more violence. So somebody who's been raped won't get cured. They won't be cured by doing something violent to themselves, and violent to a child that they might be carrying. But there's certain talk that's kind of, it's okay, we can do that. But there's certain talk that they won't talk about. And things like somebody seeing the result of an abortion is something they don't like to talk about, because the last thing they want to talk about is anything that would point to the humanity of the baby. Mm-hmm. You really don't want to do that. We don't want to be going there now. That's not a good idea. That's why they're against the ultrasound,
yes.
for example.
And so that we don't talk in euphemisms, we need to also say seeing not just the result of the abortion, seeing their baby
Absolutely.
expelled from their own body. Yeah.
And that's something else they do, and they love that, is they use this POC, mm-hmm. products of conception. And they've all these acronyms that try to, like even Planned Parenthood is the most ridiculous title for an abortion, for basically an abortion factory. An abortion factory is called Planned Parenthood. Are you kidding me? There's no planning of pregnancy going on at a Planned Parenthood. It's an abortion factory. That's what's happening. And I think you're right. I think that you're hinting at something there. I mean, we really need to be much clearer in our speech. And I think even something like, people talk about 22 weeks or 25 weeks or whatever. Better to talk in months. Because actually people really get that. Because if you say to somebody 22 weeks, they're immediately dividing by 4 and trying to work it out. Much better if you say 5 months, 6 months. Did you know? And I say it to people, and it's one thing I would say to, if you, not that I want to advise you on what you should be doing, but I do think states should put up posters. I think pro-lifers should have billboards saying, did you know it's legal to have an abortion up to 9 months here? Are you good with that? Are you all right with that? And it's interesting. I read a very interesting article by Walter Hearn, who's this guy that I've talked about, who's, I think he's in his 80s now, who runs the late-term abortion clinic in Boulder, Colorado. And he said that because very often, one of the things that the pro-abortions people do is that they lie. They just lie. They lie all the time about stuff. So they say things like, first of all, late-term abortions don't happen. Well, that's a lie. That's a complete lie. But I've got 2 points I want to make. But one point is he actually says, listen, I'm so busy. I can't give up. And the other thing that he says is people have late-term abortions for the very same set of reasons that they have early abortions. No difference. There's no kind of fetal anomalies. Mm-hmm. No, maybe, but no, it's all the same. It's all the same story,
That's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking.
Oh no, it's horrific. The other thing to say as well that I think is also a very interesting point, and something that, I don't know, can we ever change that as a law? There's no mandatory reporting of abortions in most of America, and particularly in the most populated places in America. I think that's an incredibly interesting point. So when you read numbers of the number of babies that have been killed every year, that's a guesstimate. That's just a guesstimate. But if you take the guesstimate that's given by Guttmacher, and the Guttmacher Institute is the research arm, basically, of Planned Parenthood. It's a research, I trust them, if you like, on their numbers. But they only base their numbers on what they're able to get their hands on. And according to them, there's 10,000 late-term abortions in America every year. And I think that number is nonsense. I think it's much, much higher than that. Because why are they opening all these clinics if it's not a business? Why would you run a business that you'll never have any customers for? Why would you do that? And there was just a recent dispute here in California, in Beverly Hills, where they're trying to open a late-term abortion clinic in Beverly Hills. And they got quite surprised when they got opposition to it. But they wouldn't be doing that and making that kind of investment if they didn't have potential, a business that they're pursuing.
Mm-hmm. Was that the same one that was almost being touted it was like a spa? Was that the same one?
Well, I don't know about that, but I think it was very posh. Yeah. Beverly Hills,
yes.
You can imagine. And of course, do you remember seeing that? Did you see that documentary After Tiller, by the way? Which,
I did.
Was, yeah, it won prizes in Sundance, and it was basically celebrating the people who do late-term abortions in America. And what was very striking to me about that documentary, and I watched it because, as we make the point in our podcast, we say, I watched it so you don't have to. People were having abortions for any kind of reason and every kind of reason, late-term abortions. I remember one particular one where the woman was phoning up and saying that she was really planning to go on holidays. She had this whole safari that was planned, mm-hmm. and she didn't want to put off the safari, and it would be too late when she got back. And I'm thinking, okay, so yeah, danger talk. So yeah, so they highlight stories that they feel will garner sympathy, mm-hmm. but the stories that they are not telling are actually the bigger story.
Yeah. So to your point, I want to add something really quickly that I remember from one of our earliest podcasts. We were talking about the history of the pro-life movement from kind of the early days here in our state. And, the fact that when late-term abortions, those third trimester abortions were happening here, thankfully they are not happening here right now. We're going to continue to work to keep that law protected and keep those women protected and those babies protected. But, there was a situation where a young woman wanted to be able to ride in a rodeo. And so she elected to have a late-term abortion for that reason. And another one who wanted to be able to fit into her prom dress. And so she decided to have a late-term abortion. So we know, what you're saying is absolutely true. It's horrifying. It's stomach churning. And we just can't. We just don't.
I
want
remember
that to
someone,
return.
and I'm trying to remember the context of it, but I remember I interviewed someone who had been in Gosnell's clinic, and I remember she told me she'd had, I think it was 7 abortions at Gosnell's clinic, and in the conversation she said that she had brought her 5-year-old, the last time that she went there, and I thought 5, like I'm not a mother myself, but I know 5-year-olds. They are super, super smart. Like they see everything. And I'm thinking that 5-year-old knew, that 5-year-old got a lot of information that day.
Talking about mental health issues after seeing that.
You'll not forget.
Yeah. Well, that's such shocking information. I would say one other thing too about statistics. Thankfully in the state of Kansas, we have had annual statistics for many years now. I think we had them back to, I want to say 1997. We may have had a change in the way they were reported, but we have had annual statistics available to us that have been very important and really, kept lawmakers informed, policymakers, so that we knew what was happening in the state in terms of numbers of abortions and abortion methods that were being used, things like that. And that is a really important piece of information for the public to know. So the fact that, statistics would be official state statistics would be potentially withheld from the public, I think is very concerning.
The one thing I would say about Kansas, and I mean, this is, so there's mandatory reporting in Pennsylvania, and Gosnell did not report for decades, and nothing happened. And if he could do it, you just don't know where else it's happening. So that's kind of my point about statistics. Obviously, there's lots of places where it's not mandatory at all, so they don't report. But in places where it is mandatory, you have to question whether or not the people who are enforcing the laws and the regulations are they actually enforcing the regulations? When I think about Pennsylvania, I mean, just to mention Pennsylvania, and one of the points that drives me completely batty is that, this woman died, this Nepalese refugee died, Karnamaya Mongar. No one from Harrisburg, from the Department of Health, got up from their backsides, from their cushy job, and got in their car and went to find out what the hell had happened. Like, it's beyond belief. Now, these are the same people from Harrisburg who closed down nail salons because it found cobwebs, right? So it's not like they weren't inspecting other places, but the woman had died. And not just any woman, but somebody from, and as I said, this is very progressive Pennsylvania, somebody from a minority and from a refugee, like, that we're meant to really care about. There were two women who died, Samika Shaw was the other woman, a young African-American mother. Nothing happened. Harrisburg didn't bother, right? They didn't go to the clinic and inspect the clinic. I mean, it's beyond, there isn't, people should be in prison for that. Mm-hmm. These are people, as my mother and father used to call it, in pensionable jobs, in really nice jobs. And when a woman died, like in a horrible situation, a woman died, they didn't think it was worthwhile investigating. And I mean, and it wasn't carelessness. It was carefully, it was a careful decision. We're not going there. We're not going to do that. That's a chosen thing, because they were very careful about restaurants and about places where, maybe somebody might get food poisoning and have diarrhea for a night. Like, they were going to be super, super careful about that. But these women died and they didn't do anything. So I worry very much about the people who are in the Department of Health. I hope the people in the Department of Health in Kansas are exemplary. But I wonder, and I just don't trust these people because I saw what they were capable of in Harrisburg. Mm-hmm. And even things like after the whole thing came out and we're writing the book, and I'm really proud of the book because it's very, very detailed. The stuff that could never go in the movie is in the book. I mean, the book is tough going now. I have to also warn people if they're thinking of reading it. But I remember writing to the Department of Health in Harrisburg and asking very direct questions. They never answered my questions.
Never answered.
Yeah. That's who they are. That's who the Department of State is in Pennsylvania. Like, they just won't answer your questions. It's like, you don't have a choice. You do answer my question. You literally don't have a choice, but they didn't. They didn't answer the questions. So this is, that collusion is very worrisome.
Yeah. Who is holding them accountable? How? Yeah. How can they be held accountable? Do you have any thoughts for, things that we need to be thinking of or doing in the future to, I mean, like you said, you were able to shame the media into finally covering this story. What was the key to breaking that story open?
Twitter. I think social media actually helped. I mean, Twitter at the time actually was helpful because I do know that Molly Hemingway, and we celebrated her in the book. Molly Hemingway started writing directly to, like, the Washington Post. Like, she wrote and addressed their crime correspondent and said, "Why aren't you here? Why aren't you reporting on this?" And the crime reporter, Sarah Schiff, at the time wrote back and said, "We don't cover local crime." And this is such complete nonsense. Trayvon Martin was a local case. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is complete nonsense. But by the end of the weekend, the editor of the Washington Post had eventually apologized and said, yes, we should actually be there. So that, so social media actually, it's not all bad. On occasions, obviously they are putting their hand on the scales a little bit and are obviously involved in quite a lot of censorship. But when social media is allowed to do what it's allowed to do, and Twitter is obviously a wonderful place now because Elon Musk is very good. People can find out things, and information can get out. And I would say, I would say things that people can do. I actually would encourage people to watch the Gosnell movie and to do a naughty thing. Like, can suggest. So with young people particularly, I would do something like I would have people over to the house and say, I'm buying pizza tonight or whatever, and get young people to watch the movie, and talk about it afterwards, because I have literally seen people converted within less than an hour and a half by watching that movie.
Wow.
Because they're learning stuff that is incontrovertible, absolutely incontrovertible. It was in a court case. It's got nothing to do with the pro-life movement. This was a court case. This is what happened. This is a crime scene. This was involved with the CSI, with the detectives, with people from the district attorney's office. This is a typical kind of, could be a Law and Order episode, but it's true. And you're left with these questions, and you're left with this knowledge that you didn't have before. That's actually very helpful, and I think it's maybe a very good entryway to talk to young people, because we need to be talking to young people.
Yeah.
I'm not getting pregnant anytime soon. You know what I mean? So young people need to be targeted. I would be targeting them and trying to engage with them, because they're getting a lot of misinformation a lot of the time.
Yes, agree completely. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is so true. If we can create that kind of cognitive dissonance almost, where, these assumptions that we've been living with, or that some people have been living with because they believe what the media tells them, or what the pro-abortion activists are telling them. And then they're presented with that set of facts. It creates that inner tension where, you're left at a decision point, and you have to decide, who do I believe? And you also have to think about who benefits from, telling lies versus telling truth. And it's obvious who would benefit from certain things not being known, not being discussed. If we're talking billions of dollars on the line. If you play that out across years and years, and we have to realize the powerful interests behind it, and why there's so much effort that gets poured into covering these things.
Yeah, we're really up
covering
against
up.
it, by the way. We're really up against it because the media are, collude with the pro-abortion movement to say things that aren't true. And then it's very hard, like this, women die. This is a lie, this is a complete lie. But it sounds, it would grab you if you don't know anything and you hear, well, women will die. You're like, oh God, well, I don't want women to die. And, women's choice. And you're like, I want choice. I love Costco. You know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of being flippant, but they have very good lines. They have very good lines that they have, and very good lies that they use that are, and they're using them a lot. And it's hard. We're on the back foot a lot. So we have to be very creative.
And we're constrained. We're constrained by truth. We're people who come from a moral basis, and so we're not going to lie for our own gain. So I think that's part of the difficulty, is that we just have to. We're very precise and we're very careful, and we want to make sure that we explain everything. And it's difficult sometimes when you're fighting against these quick little taglines that are completely misleading people into believing things that are not true. I agree wholeheartedly. So if people want to follow your work, and you do such creative things, I know I've read some of your Substack, and just seen all these different projects that you're working on, where should they follow you?
So it's the unreportedstoriesociety.com. That's the website where everything is. My name is Anne McElhenney. I'm on Twitter. I'm really quite into Twitter now, I have to say. We're on, where else are we? We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and all of those, all those kind of places. And actually, I just want to add something at the end, and it's kind of an interesting thing. Maybe we should be talking about this offline, and you can always edit it out if you want to. But we have an enormous number of DVDs of the Gosnell movie, which we are very happy to give to you for free, if you want them. And the only thing that we would ask would be that you pay for the shipping. But I've got thousands of them in a warehouse, and I'd love to see them deployed. in a useful way. So if you want them, do get in touch with me about that.
Yeah.
But I think people need to be creative, and I think telling stories change the world, and people are very influenced by movies, and that's why, I think the movie has been so effective in getting people engaged with the issue and getting people engaged who the hard to get to people. And by the way, maybe I didn't mention this. We also did a true crime podcast based on the Gosnell story, which I would highly recommend. And it interviews people like the detectives who were involved and the district attorneys who were involved, the assistant district attorneys who were involved. And it's called Serial Killer, a true crime podcast. And that could be a very good thing to share with young people, because true crime is huge in the podcast space. And we've had very, very good reaction to that, because a lot of people, it's very funny. People have, if you look at the comments, when you look at that podcast, there's comments where people say, this is the worst. I hate this podcast. I listened to 6 episodes and she's really pro-life. And it's like, yeah, but you listened to 6 episodes. It's like, okay, because that's how good it is. And the reason, they get annoyed at the end because it's pretty obvious my position. But I mean, but at the same time, it's very journalistic. It's very much talking to the police and to the people who eventually put Gosnell behind bars forever.
Wonderful. And how do they find that? One more time.
So it's Serial Killer, a true crime podcast.
Okay.
Serial Killer, a true crime, and it's everywhere where you, as they say, everywhere where you get podcasts.
Yes.
And I can send you those links, by the way, and you could probably put them up in your show notes.
That's great. We'll do that. You bet. And I also think that some people are maybe afraid of what they might see in a visual format, and it might be a little bit less intimidating to approach the whole subject from an audio, that kind of engagement.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. And I would like to say, because I have genuinely met people, and I even met some people in Ireland recently who said, yeah, my husband watched the movie. I couldn't look at it. And I really need to tell people, the movie was very intentionally made in a way that you can watch it, because you don't see anything.
Yes, I second that. I second that.
Right? So you know that. I would let a young person watch it. Anyone who's over, like over 14, I think it'd be perfectly fine. I think because we got the, whatever the thing is, I think it's PG-12 or whatever. So it's very.
It's very tastefully done.
I would put a health warning on the book. I mean, I'm very proud of the book, but I would definitely say the book is tough going.
It's for mature audiences on the book.
It's for mature audiences. It's. I mean, I always describe it as like it's a page turner, in the sense of, you read a page and you think, okay, this is the worst thing I've ever read. Then you turn the page and the next page is worse. It's literally that bad.
Wow.
But I'm very proud of it, because I think everything needs to be recorded. We wanted to get everything in there,
yes,
and particularly things we could never put in the movie. I remember there was one scene in the, we were going to have it in the movie, and I remember we got on the set and we had a set set up and everything. We're like, no, we can't put that in the movie, but it's in the book.
Wow.
Everything's in the book.
Okay. Well, I will tell you, I will be forthright and say I was one of those people who was afraid to watch it. But knowing that we were going to be talking about this today, I said, nope, I can't put this off anymore. I'm going to go do it. So I went and I searched it online, and I found a way to watch it digitally. I think it was Christian Media. I'm sure that there are a few other streaming services. And I rented it and watched it. And it was not easy because of the subject matter, but you're exactly right. There was nothing in it that just made me cringe or feel sick at all, or, just other than just realizing that this is the true story of Kermit Gosnell and his victims. And his victims included both preborn babies and the women who came into that facility. And we just don't know how many women are victimized every day across this country. So, well, thank you so much for joining us. This was really, really interesting. You're a wealth of information. I love your passion. I love your it's so interesting to hear how you were converted almost into that. Yes. I mean, coming from such a different vantage point, but what a huge impact the truth makes, and being confronted with truth, and then realizing that you can no longer hold that old set of beliefs or assumptions, or, and then just becoming this absolute messenger for that truth is really powerful.
Thank you. I mean, it's really weird, like, but I'm so grateful for this story actually, and for the work we did on it, because I've met the best people ever. I've met like amazing people because of this, and I'm very grateful for that. It's funny because I remember going one time to see Gosnell. I went to the prison to meet him and to interview him, and it was very disturbing, as you can imagine. And he touched my leg and was just horrific. But I remember getting in the car afterwards, and we drove directly to Philadelphia and met Detective Jim Wood for dinner. And he said, and meeting him, he's just light. He is light, and he is just goodness and a wonderful person, and I'm a gift to the world. So there's lots of really, really good people, particularly people in the pro-life movement. I mean, I'm always, it's like anytime, if you might end up somewhere and you find out that there's like a pro-life march, it's like, well, that's all. They're my friend. Like, they're just, you can immediately pal up immediately with those people. You're like, hey, how's it going?
Yes.
And get into a conversation. I just love going to pro-life events, because it's like, these are my people.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. You absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you.
And thank you also to our listeners. We hope you liked this episode, this conversation. I learned so much, and I hope you did too. And I hope you'll share it with a friend. So just hit that share button, send it to someone you know will be interested. If you haven't yet, please make sure you hit subscribe on whatever platform you're listening or watching on, so that you'll be notified of future episodes. And also, we love to hear from listeners. So if you would like to leave us a review, please do that. You could also send us an email if you want to do it on a more private basis at kfl@kfl.org. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, that's Twitter, and TikTok at Kansans for Life. Until next time, never forget, the pro-life movement is on the right side of history. Truth always wins in the end. Thanks, friends. We'll see you soon.